So the question I got was how to increase your back squat, or the most common question I got was how to increase your back squat, your strength and hypertrophy. There was a couple of questions that came through this. I'm just going to kind of bundle them all together. Let's specifically talk about the back squat. Now remember, it's all going to be relevant to the subject. So who is the person that needs to increase their back squat? That's the first thing. It's obviously individually bound, but the literature typically shows that your frequency, and I'm going to talk about frequency and then I'll talk about volume. The frequency to build hypertrophy, the kind of sweet spot is about twice per week. And where it differs with strength, it's 2.5 to 3 times per week where you have to stimulate the muscle group or the specific movement pattern. So it really does depend on the person. If it's a person that hasn't trained a lot, then once a week is going to be completely enough for them. And if it's a person that's more trained, like a more advanced athlete, maybe a semi-final athlete, you're probably looking at starting at about twice a week, going into 3 times a week if they need to increase their numbers. And now I'm specifically talking about 1RM back squat. Then when it gets to hypertrophy and it gets to strength, we saw some literature that went up from 10 to 15 sets. We saw some literature at 24 sets. We saw some literature at 36 sets. And we did see some literature at 52 sets as well, which all showed significant increases in muscle hypertrophy, except from 36 to 52 sets per week. And this is now all exercises, not just necessarily the back squat. What's also need to be considered is that when it comes to strength, you do not need that much volume and that amount of sets, because it's a fast recipe for injury. And it showed in regards to strength, now this is specifically to do with 1RMs again, you're looking at about 10 to 15 sets per week when it gets to strength work, working at a very high RPE. This is now close repetition and reserve. But the other question is, when do you know how much to train hypertrophy versus how much to train in strength? Again, it depends. You have to go back to who is the subject. If it's somebody that has a very, very low training career or history, you're going to do more hypertrophy work for them. If it's somebody, and now specifically in regards to CrossFit, that has already a relatively fine engine, meaning cardiovascular system, but the weights that is prescribed in CrossFit is just too heavy for them, you would probably make them do only hypertrophy and strength due to their 1RM being so low in relative movements, and also as a percentage of the weight subscribed to their 1RM will be very, very low. So their biggest bang for their bucks is just to get strong, get bigger muscles, and bigger muscle has the potential to be a stronger muscle. So to ask your question, if it's a newbie, I'd make them do hypertrophy all year round. If it's a more advanced athlete, I'd probably get them to do much more conditioning, much more typical metabolic work, interval work, coupled that with strength work and cycling the strength work through the year round. Because what we can also determine that hypertrophy can be built on any phase. So as long as the weight is heavier than 30%, you'll get a hypertrophic stimulus if that thing or that movement is brought to momentarily failure or close proximity to failure, which is very much a lot of CrossFit movements. So to answer your question, it depends. It depends. But if it's a newbie, I would definitely go away and do much more hypertrophy work and stimulate that with some strength work. If it's a more advanced athlete, I probably won't do as much hypertrophy work. I would do strength work and a hell of a lot of conditioning and energy system work, working on VO2 maxes, on monostructural and metabolic conditioning, I would do lactate thresholds and base aerobic work. Hope that answers your question.